next conversation, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about how grocers and brands are working to support farmers and healthy eating. So again, Chloe is going to be the moderator for this conversation. I love Chloe Sorvino more than I can tell you. Joining her is Brandon Lombardi, the Chief Legal Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer at Sprouts Farmers Market, Dorothy Shaver, the Global Food Sustainability Director for Unilever, Stephen Jennings, the Stakeholder Relations and Brand Lead for Health and Sustainability at Ahold Delhaize USA, and Paul Lightfoot, General Manager of Patagonia Provisions. Just a reminder to all of you as panelists, hold your mics close to your mouths because the live stream audience is listening. They need to hear you. And again, use the hashtag ClimateWeekNYC. Thank you all. Round of applause, please.
Okay. So this panel, we're set up perfectly, really, to transition from my work with my book, Raw Deal, which centers these food justice conversations and specifically around climate change and meat, to my work with Forbes, which is really talking about how corporations can actually do their job and make real change, be scalable, and be held accountable. So it's gonna be great, though. Don't worry. I want to start off. We just had an amazing day with so many ideas, so many real exciting things being talked about. Why don't we each hear a little bit about your work to introduce yourself and tell us about what's bringing you the most hope these days? Why don't you start off?
Thanks so much, Chloe, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm Paul Lightfoot from Patagonia. I'm leading a relatively new food business. And the mission of Patagonia is the same for food as it is for our apparel. We're in business to save our home planet, and we feel like we can't solve the climate crisis without solving the emissions from food. I mean, in America, it's largely fossil fuel based. I'm optimistic in the sense that we're here talking about this, which we probably wouldn't have been 5 years ago. People are becoming aware of the role of food in the harm to our waterways, to our soil, to our biodiversity, and particularly to the climate. I'm also the board chair of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which is focused on these matters.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's pretty much one of the strongest labels I see out there. And so I think if you don't know about it, listen in.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen. I'm with Ahold Delhaize USA. And if you do not know who we are the largest East Coast grocery retail group stretching from Maine down to Georgia, over to Tennessee and Kentucky. So we have 5 great local brands that all operate locally. Stop and Shop is in this area, if that helps anybody. So we're doing a lot. And what inspires me is all these conversations that we've had on all the previous panels actually applies to the grocery retail business. And what's exciting for someone, so I started as a bagger 28 years ago, and I've seen the evolution of literally doing probably nothing, I probably shouldn't say that, to where we are today, and it's making large-scale impact, whether it's from regenerative ag practices, but I focus more on the dignity of the shop. And we heard a lot about that in the previous panel as well, is we don't know what our customers, ourselves, anybody in this room is going through on a day-to-day basis. The face of hunger is faceless. It's everybody, right? So the things we focus on are 4 strategic pillars, and it's feeding families, not landfills. That should be an obvious, right? But it involves a lot of education at a store level because, unfortunately, that's where a lot of the waste occurs. So that's that piece. Then it's moving into traceability and where's the food coming from, resiliency, water usage, all the things we've been talking about today. But then into that waste reduction, food waste reduction, removal from landfill, and then ultimately the really big one, which is climate action, Scope 3 emissions reduction, and so on. So that's the start.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Dorothy Shaver. I lead food sustainability at a relatively old company called Unilever, of course. Most of you probably know their brands. Famous food brands, of course, are Knorr, and Hellmann's. Those are probably the 2 largest ones that you're aware of. And I lead our whole strategy from a global perspective. So I'm located in the Netherlands, which is where our global team sits, and I lead our strategy across the world. The areas that I focus on, of course, are climate, nature, plastics, livelihoods, and diet and health. I'm a dietitian by background, so diet and health is also a passion of mine. And I'm hopeful because I'm seeing more systems conversations happening. So I think for a long time, time it was, all the food companies sitting together and talking about one thing, and then in a different area the suppliers are doing something, and the retailers are someplace else, and the farmers are someplace else. And I think I'm really hopeful, and thanks to Food Tank for doing this in most of their panels, for bringing people together from across the system. Because I think for a long time we were doing a lot of blaming and naming, shaming, blaming of food brands or of retailers or of one little group for doing the wrong thing or rewarding them for doing the right thing. So I'm very hopeful that we're now talking at a systems change level. So happy to be here with all of you.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Brandon Lombardi. I run sustainability for a company called Sprouts Farmers Market. Many of you may not know who we are because we're not in New York, but I'll give you a quick context of who we are. But first, let me say thanks to Food Tank for putting this together. I mean, it's been incredible watching the panelists, very talented, intelligent, passionate people doing important work. So thanks again for hosting this. So Sprouts Farmers Market is a natural and organic specialty retailer. We focus on really specialty diets, very fresh, focused, paleo, keto, plant-based, gluten-free, vegan, really try to get narrow and change the food system through, focusing on a health enthusiast customer. We're very fresh focused, so 20% of our business is fresh produce, and we're in 23 states, and we focus on local as much as possible. We've got 7 distribution centers, and we self-distribute produce. And why that's important, to give you a little bit of context, is if you think about a conventional grocery store, they may sell 6-8% produce, and that's where they make their margin because they're competing in the center store for CPG items. We flip the script and we make the center store produce. So sell a lot of produce, and we do a lot of local. In our distribution centers, we employ people who focus on going out and finding small farmers. And because we do it ourselves, we can take 1 truckload of strawberries that a local farmer has. Because as many of you may know, local farming has a really difficult challenge with distribution and scale. And it's tough to supply large grocers like Sprouts, 23 states, 425 stores, $7.5 billion in revenue. It's difficult to get farmers who are local based and support local economies unless you do it in a really, really different way. And so that's kind of how we go to market and how we think about it. And I'll just touch really quickly on our foundation because our charitable arm focuses on food insecurity and food education. We build school gardens and partner that with nutrition curriculum. Last year we touched 3 million kids, kind of where they are, teaching them how to cook, where their food comes from, building the gardens, growing the food. So really trying to change their relationship to food. And we do it in Title I schools, traditionally underserved. So that's kind of how we think about approaching some of those areas. So that's what we do.
Thanks. Okay, let's turn it back to Paul. I want to talk about some success stories you've seen from the ROC, but also from Patagonia Provisions. I mean, changing supply chains is so hard, and I think some of the power of the storytelling you can share is how you've been able to actually change what you're sourcing at scale. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, and we are a storytelling organization, but I'll talk about just what's happening in the market. So we think about one of our roles being in the food business as being a demand anchor for farmers and fishers and ranching that are making food in a way that we think is the most responsible. So a couple examples, we make crackers from a regenerative organic certified wheat coming from a multi-generation family farm in the Skagit Valley of Washington. We basically gave them demand signals and incentivized them to convert their farm to regenerative organic certified. We have done the same thing with a terrific grain that's a perennial, not an annual, called kernza. It's a little bit like wheat. We're making beer from that now. We're making pasta from that now. And we basically recognize how hard it is for farms to change things. They only have so many seasons. They're sort of entrapped in a system that forces them to do things a certain way. So we tend to give them very strong signals, advanced contracts in some cases, guaranteeing a price, guaranteeing a volume, and it's working and getting them to convert their practices.
So it takes a while.
Yeah, well, yes. Put yourself in the shoes of a farmer, and there's a lot to worry about and a lot of pressures. Some of it social pressures, right? But there's tons of other businesses out there that are also converting to ROC, and you've got sort of long-standing multi-generation companies like Dr. Bronner's, You've got startups like Simply. I think Sorella is going to be here today, and Little Bucks, and all of the ones that are doing this. And I think there's now about 60 brands in the United States that are ROC. They're just thriving. If you look at Spin's data, they've got strong pricing power, very strong demand, and growing quickly, which is part of why I've got some optimism.
Good. So I want to actually, I wanted to make this point on the last panel too, but I think just to underscore it, soil health is so important for so many reasons, obviously for all the climate reasons that we're all here to talk about today, but also from that health perspective and also bridging some of these nutritional gaps, because we know that when soil health is at the forefront of farming, that produce, those grains that are produced are healthier, they are better for you, they have more nutritional content when you see the data. And so I think that's really kind of important to hear. I also on the last panel, but I'll ask this panel too, because I think it ties in. To the grocers on this panel, I would love to hear your perspective. There's been this recent movement to use Medicaid, Medicare, even some HSA, FSA dollars towards, buying produce, either through alternatives or just through grocers. I mean, how is that working on the kind of big scale that you all work with, especially from Ahold?
Yeah, for sure. So there's been a huge rise, not that it's new, but a huge rise in healthy benefits or access to healthy benefits provided by healthcare providers and Medicaid, Medicare. We're talking millions of dollars that have been put into the system to provide accessibility for primarily fresh but healthier options. So there's a couple of things. So these kind of just flooded the market, and the grocery retailers weren't really engaged in the process. And in some cases, which is a whole other panel, cards were being declined because they actually weren't being accepted in retailers because they just thought if they put a Visa or a MasterCard logo on something that it would just automatically work. Well, unfortunately, it did not work. So we got that corrected in our stores. But then what happens is the education and awareness around what's accepted, what's not. Because if we're going to be transparent and talk about affordable and accessible, unfortunately, produce isn't always affordable and accessible for everybody. We want it to be, right? And that's where scalable partnerships with our CPG partners and farmers all come into play. But and I can speak to this from experience, as one of the most influential roles, impactful roles of my career was being a cashier. Why do I say that? Because when you have that mother with 3 kids and they're on government benefits, whether it's SNAP, WIC, etc., and they come through the line and you have to tell them that they unfortunately do not have enough benefits for their order, they have to remove things. And guess what? The first things being removed are? It's the fresh items, it's the produce items, because they tend to cost a little bit more money. In some cases, a lot more money. So one of the things we really hyper-focus on is, one, that nutrition, education, and awareness that I mentioned. So we have a nutritional rating system. Every single thing in our store is rated through a program called Guiding Stars, which rates by 1, 2, or 3 star system, good, better, best, what is more nutritionally dense than another. It broadens the spectrum. So one of the things we're working with folks that are providing these healthy benefits is expand what is better for you so that it's accessible for everybody. Because as a retailer, our goal is to meet everyone where they're at. And unfortunately, switching from Doritos to kale isn't on everyone's plate, right? And that's a little harder transition. So we want to meet them where they are. And I heard nudging on the last panel. I love the word nudging. What we are doing, our role now is to nudge our consumers to these better for you choices by also trying to make them scalable as far as affordable and accessible for everybody.
Yeah, sure. So we try to go to the core of the issue around fresh. So we price our produce lower than everybody else in the market, pretty much. I mean, I'll take any challenge if you can show me some pricing that beats our produce, and we do that on purpose. Like I said earlier in my opening remarks, we kind of flip the script and make produce the center of the store, and we do that as our loss leader is not the right term, but we're 25 to 30% below, other specialty retailers, 10+% below conventionals, and half of what we sell is organic. In terms of produce. So huge volume of organic, and we do it at an entry point that allows access for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to access organic produce. And so we just go right at it in terms of how do we provide access for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. Of course, we accept SNAP and everything else, but we think just access means affordability around fresh, and that's how we approach it.
From the Unilever perspective, I want to bring you in. I know you've done a lot of cage-free for Hellmann's. I think that was a very large effort. But I wanted to talk realistically. Like, how long are you looking at for timelines to make some of these big changes that we're talking about here? I mean, how much can be enacted kind of quickly?
Okay, so just a couple of things. I'm just going to make a couple points on things that have been said. So I think the first one is in relation to changing the way that we're farming and looking at nutrients. I do have a call to action for those of you in the room who are really working in research, because there isn't enough research in that space for us to actually make that claim. And we just published, actually about a year ago, a piece of work where we did a meta-analysis on every single study that's out there on changing the way that foods are grown in relation to nutrients. And what came out is that zinc and iron can potentially go up in tomatoes and in rice, which are two staple crops, which is great, and two nutrients that most people, particularly females, are actually deficient in. But what my fear is that we're putting everything kind of in this bucket and saying that regenerative agriculture does all these things. And I just want to make sure that we're really checking our sources all the time. So I'm happy to share that piece of work with you through any type of medium that you want. But it's also scary because those studies aren't financed because nobody's making money off of them. So we need to make sure that we're pushing collectively as researchers to make sure that the right research is being done in the right places so that we get the right answers for our consumers. So I think that's one that's just a little bee in my bonnet, that I have to just make sure that we're on the right line on that. And also the other thing that I was thinking about as we just sat here was we're utilizing these words like helping farmers transition to regenerative agriculture principles or helping them maintain regenerative agriculture principles. And I think that in the face of climate change that we can't really say that the transition happens and then they maintain. And I think that's something we have to be really careful about, especially those of us who are working for companies that are financially supporting the transition and the maintenance of regenerative agriculture. Because we've been working with farmers in Iowa. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a big group of farmers we work together with who grow our soybeans for Hellmann's and they grow corn for PepsiCo. And we've been working with them for about 5 years, and we've been funding the transition. And just last year, they had a bad weather year, so then they went to do different practices that we probably wouldn't call regenerative and didn't prove to be regenerative when we looked at the impacts. But the challenge we have here is that we have to guide farmers and have long-term contracts for a long time. So we all want everything to happen really quickly, but we actually have to work together collectively for long-term. And I think I really would like for us to try to push ourselves to stop saying transition and maintenance, because the agility of farmers is what we need to be able to watch as we support this transition and support farmers as we go through climate change, which is going to become more and more and more prevalent. So my answer to how long does it take is going to be a long time, because we've been working in sustainable agriculture in Unilever for about 12 years, and about 3 years ago we moved to implement regenerative agriculture practices and principles with a lot of our suppliers we've been working with for a long time. Some of the practices are having positive impacts, like rice in Arkansas, 50% less greenhouse gas emissions, pretty huge, about a third less water used, and they're really happy with it. Other projects are much more challenging, and we have to be closer to them. So I think those are kind of my critical points, I would say, is one, let's make sure that we're checking our research before we get consumers to purchase things for certain benefits that we're not certain about. And the second one is let's make sure that we're supporting our farmers and not acting like let's pay for a 3-year transition and then be like, okay, see ya, keep moving with your farming practices, because we're going to need different equipment over time, different types of seeds over time, different education over time. So we have to make sure that we're collectively supporting that.
If I can add one thing, what I would say in response to that is, so yes and no. So one is we do need to move towards, regenerative practices and things like that. I think that's very important. However, and I attach this back to plant-based, it's a lot of times commercially it's used as marketing tools. And then what happens is then we put a premium on it. And then it becomes, again, not affordable and accessible for everybody. And I use plant-based as an example because I think we can all agree that, reducing, animal proteins and things like that are obviously better from emissions reduction, all that fun stuff. But the plant-based alternative, I don't know if anybody's looked at the facts, the nutrition facts on the back of those products. They're high in sodium. They're high in fillers. So they actually are not, not all, of course, but the ones being mass-produced are not nutritionally better for you. So you have to be very, very careful. And so, I do agree that my fear is that I don't want these things to turn into, marketing tools so that we can raise prices on customers.
Yeah, no, a very good fear. I mean, a third of my book is about the plant-based craziness and just how much really was fake about that, no pun intended. But, Paul, I want to give you a chance to respond to some of this. I will just say I hear you on, that we need to all have a better understanding, just like be more flexible with understanding with the constraints and the demands of farming, especially given how much climate crisis is going to be getting worse and how extreme weather will be disrupting things. That said, I mean, I still have seen a lot of interesting studies about carrots, spinach. I don't need to mention those too, but there is something real to be said about the phytonutrients and other nutritional content that's in produce from healthier soils. Paul, did you have anything else you wanted to share around there?
I do. Yeah, the question of nutrient density, I think, is super interesting, and one that I agree with Dorothy that we don't have enough data yet. I think you can all sort of check your own guts on this. Most farmland in the U.S. is growing crops, most of which, by the way, aren't to feed you. They're for ethanol for cars or for feed for CAFOs. But most of it is grown with synthetic fertilizer. The growth is happening because natural gas-derived fertilizer is growing food. It's growing quickly, right? But it's not growing it with the minerals and the other nutrients in the soil that eventually find their way into humans, right? So it's true that we don't have the data yet, but I don't think it's a stretch to imagine we're going to get the data. And at Patagonia, we've made an investment in a company called Audacious that's trying to create the data sets to be able to prove that. And I think it's going to be an amazing unlock for consumer demand when we can make those claims, although I agree that we can now. The one thing, I'm going to switch topics if I can, the one thing I think we haven't talked about enough today is that most of our farmland is being used to essentially convert natural gas into crops. Yep. And it's a catastrophe if you think we need to take fossil fuels out of our economy. When we talk about the transition, which is a word I'm fond of, in the electricity generation industry. You talk about saying, hey, we need to transition away from coal. It's been going pretty well so far. We need to eventually convert away from all fossil fuel-based sources of electricity generation. And I think we need to start developing the vocabulary for food as well. If we're going to be serious about solving the climate crisis, we have to take fossil fuels out of the bedrock of the way most of our farmland is used. Now, luckily, most of it isn't used to grow food. There's a lot of capacity.
Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, and I'm not sure if Marion Nessel is here yet, but hi, Marion. I would be remiss not to ask her favorite question, which is, just to end this panel, how does shareholder returns work at your organizations and in your corporations? I mean, these are publicly traded companies. Not all on this panel, but I'd like to hear how you guys balance climate and health and nutrition concerns with the overwhelming need to increase shareholder returns.
For you,
it's a little different.
So at Patagonia, we would put health and the environmental crises and the welfare of people ahead of everything, including our financial returns. And by the way, the mission was we're in business to save our own planet. We're very clear about being a for-profit company, but all of our dividends flow into a purpose trust whose only purpose is to fight the climate crisis. We're also never going to be bashful about charging what we think is a fair price for responsibly produced products, from our ski jackets to our pasta. We're always thinking that the cost of externalities have to be based in, and producing things responsibly is going to be more expensive today, and that's okay. All movements started off as a niche. We don't mind being in small segments of markets that demonstrate to the world where we need to go in the long run, and we're hopeful we'll get there. And if not, that's too bad.
The short answer is our investors are demanding it from us. So specifically, we have three metrics that are tied to financial incentive, including all the way down the store level, which is increasing what we call healthy sales, which is those Guiding Stars rated products in our stores. It's reducing food waste, which the only way that we can do that and impact that metric is by either selling everything and or donating it directly to people. And the third thing is the Scope 3 emissions reduction. Those are all tied to financial incentive. Although I would love to sit here and tell you out of the goodness of everyone's heart that this all makes sense, if you don't tie it to the language of the business to where it reverberates across all of our leaders all the way to the store level, we're not going to see true change. We have that in place, and it is driving performance, so I'm really excited about that.
It's actually quite similar, but so I'll go relatively quickly. I think first and foremost, we've gotten more questions from investors about sustainability over the past few years than literally anything else. They were completely drilling me 2 weeks ago on every single thing that we're doing. So I think that goes to show that the interest in it is absolutely there. The second thing is we report our annual report financials together with our sustainability commitments and where we've gone with progress. This year, we have really streamlined our commitments to be really around climate, nature, plastics, and livelihoods, diet and health, and food, of course, as well, so that we can really get that story together across the entire Unilever business, which, of course, goes far beyond foods. The other thing is that all of us, every single person that works in Unilever, has a financial incentive for us to meet our short-term sustainability goals every year, including our leadership executives. So therefore, the way that they get paid with their bonus or with their incentives or shares, it's directly aligned with how well we do with sustainability.
And my answer is probably the easiest. Our consumer expects it of us. And so we deliver. I mean, we've been doing this. It's in our DNA. So we source better. We have better practices. We source grass-fed meat that's not on deforested land. I mean, again, organic, as much ROC as we possibly can. I mean, a whole pillar of our business is, we call it foraging. And that's to go find, young, diverse, women-owned, veteran-owned entrepreneurs trying to bring new and more responsibly grown and raised food into the food system. Paul and I work together. I think we were one of your first retailers. We go out and we try to find these products that are better for the planet, that are better for people. That resonates with our customers, so that drives revenue, that drives our share price, that makes investors happy. But we get to it. It's easy for us because that's what we do. So, I'm in a fortunate position to be able to say that. Not many companies can say that.
Well, thank you so much. If I'm just going to end this, I'll say, everyone, urgency, that is the key here. We need real change, real scale to happen. And yeah, I'll end with quoting Anna from earlier. Vote with your dollar, but really vote with your vote. Yeah.